everyone, and welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a topic that is absolutely essential, not just for your day-to-day infrastructure management, but it's also highly testable on your certification journey. Our exact focus today is NCP-MCI 7.5, 6.4 Nutanix Guest Tools, commonly known as NGT. If you're an infrastructure admin prepping for this exam, you already know that understanding the nuances of how the Nutanix hypervisor actually interacts with guest operating systems is absolutely critical. So we're going to decode the exact facts, the features, and those tricky edge cases that you need to master this topic perfectly. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap. First up, we'll cover why NGT matters. Then, a detailed walkthrough of its features. Third, we'll hit those common exam traps and edge cases. And finally, we'll wrap up with the key facts you absolutely must memorize. All right, let's jump right into Section 1, why NGT matters. To really grasp NGT, we have to look at the fundamental architecture of a Nutanix cluster, right? We need to understand why a bridge is even needed between the underlying infrastructure and the VMs running on top of it. So, at its core, Nutanix Guest Tools is a software package bundled directly with the Acropolis operating system, or AOS. When you install it, you're actually placing a very specialized service called the Nutanix Guest Agent, the NGA, directly inside your guest virtual machine. Think of the NGA as your vital inside agent, because without it, the underlying hypervisor and the controller VM, the CVM, basically treat the guest OS like a black box. They can't see inside. By deploying NGT, you establish the secure, continuous communication channel between the guest OS and the CVM. And this channel, it's exactly what unlocks all the advanced VM management functionalities we rely on every day. Interestingly, the NGA service is actually written in Python, and it ships with its own dedicated installation, so it doesn't conflict with anything else you got running on the guest system. Now, here is a very specific number you need to know: 2074. For that secure communication channel between the guest VM and the CVM to actually work, two major networking prerequisites have to be met. First, your Nutanix cluster has to be configured with a virtual IP address. And second, port 2074 must be open between the guest VMs and the CVMs. Seriously, write this down, highlight it, put a star next to it. If you see a troubleshooting scenario on the exam where NGT features just aren't responding, checking if port 2074 is open is step 1. Moving right along to Section 2, detailed walkthrough and features. Let's see how this actually builds into the specific features NGT enables and exactly how you go about deploying it in your environment. Deploying NGT from the Prism web console is incredibly straightforward, but for the exam, you need to know the exact sequence. First, you select your target VM. Next, you click on Manage Guest Tools. Inside that window, you'll first check the box to Enable Nutanix Guest Tools, which registers the VM with the NGT service. Then you check Mount Nutanix Guest Tools. What this does is it takes an ISO file with the volume label Nutanix_tools and virtually attaches it to the guest VM's CD-ROM drive. From there, the NGT installer can just run from inside the guest. But wait, huge exam trap alert right here. I'm shifting to a more serious tone for a second because this catches admins out in the real world and on the test all the time. For that mounting process to actually succeed, the VM absolutely must have at least one empty IDE CD-ROM slot available. If there's no empty slot to attach that Nutanix_tools ISO, the deployment will just flat out fail. Always, always verify your virtual hardware configuration before attempting to push NGT. So once NGT is running, it completely changes how you handle backups. Without NGT, your snapshots are crash consistent. That means they capture data exactly as it sits on the disk, but anything currently processing in memory, it's gone. It's literally like yanking the power cord out of the wall. But with NGT, you get application-consistent snapshots. It does this by utilizing the Volume Shadow Copy Service, or VSS, acting alongside the native in-guest Nutanix VM Quiescent Snapshot service. Basically, this tells the guest OS and your apps to pause and flush their memory to disk right before the snapshot is taken. And the real beauty here? NGT does all this without causing VM stuns. You know, those temporary, super frustrating moments where a VM becomes completely unresponsive. No stuns here. This is also what allows third-party backup providers like Commvault or Rubrik to take proper app-consistent snapshots natively on the Nutanix platform. And this brilliantly illustrates another massive benefit of NGT: Self-Service Restore, or SSR. You might also hear it called File-Level Restore. This feature is an absolute lifesaver because it empowers the guest VM administrators to recover their own files with zero intervention from you. Once you, the infrastructure admin, deploy NGT and check that SSR box in Manage Guest Tools, the guest OS user can just log into the VM, mount a snapshot, and restore the files they accidentally deleted themselves. But Nutanix actually thought ahead about the management overhead of SSR. Think about it. What happens if a user mounts a restore disk, grabs their lost spreadsheet, and then completely forgets to detach that disk? Well, here's another crucial metric you've got to memorize. 24. If the guest admin fails to detach the disk, the system will automatically detach it from the VM after exactly 24 hours. This is great because it prevents your cluster from getting all cluttered up with orphaned mounted snapshot disks. NGT also plays a big role in performance monitoring through guest metrics collection. When it's active, the guest VM makes an RPC, a remote procedure call, to the CVM every 30 seconds to fetch hypervisor-level metrics, things like CPU ready time, and it publishes them directly into the Windows Perfmon utility inside the guest. But I want you to pause and pay really close attention to this next point. This feature is entirely disabled by default in the guest VM. In fact, to even turn it on, you actually have to contact Nutanix support. It's a very counterintuitive fact, which, as you can probably guess, makes it a perfect trick question for the exam. So we've covered how great NGT is when everything is running smoothly. But let me pose a question to you. What happens to the NGT service and its configuration when you clone a VM or when you perform an in-place revert from a previous snapshot? Let's get into Section 3, Common Exam Traps and Edge Cases for the NCP-MCI 7.5 exam. If you're studying for this right now, I need you to focus because the NCP-MCI exam absolutely loves testing your knowledge not just on how things work, but on how they break, and specifically how you fix them. Cloning and reverting VMs inherently disrupt the enabled state of NGT. So the crucial takeaway here is that NGT does not automatically survive these operations in an active state. Let's break it down. First, if you clone a VM and that clone is powered off, you must go into Prism, enable NGT from the UI, and then power it on. What if the clone is already powered on? Well, you still enable it in the UI, but then you must manually restart the Nutanix Guest Agent service from inside the Guest OS so it can reconnect. Now, what about an in-place revert to an older snapshot? The VM actually restores the NGT configuration files from that previous point in time, but the service itself is left disabled after the revert finishes. You must go in and manually re-enable NGT from the UI. Memorize these specific workflows, guys. They are heavily, heavily tested. After you perform one of those clones or reverts, you're definitely going to want to verify that the communication link is actually restored. Now, while you can see some status indicators in Prism, you can also drop right into the CVM command line. By running the command ncli-nist-list using the Nutanix command line interface, you'll get a detailed printout of the VM's guest tools state. What you're specifically looking for right at the very bottom of that output is a line that says communication link active true. If that says true, boom, your NGS service is successfully talking to the CVM again. All right, let's bring it home with Section 4, Key Facts to Memorize. We have covered a lot of ground today, from the core architecture all the way to those tricky edge cases. So let's lock these key facts into memory right now. Consider this your ultimate rapid-fire cheat sheet for the NGT portion of the exam. Number 1. Network connectivity. Port 2074 must be open between the VM and the CVM. Number 2. Deployment prerequisites. You absolutely must have an empty IDE CD-ROM slot available to mount that installer. Number 3. Management overhead. Self-service restore disks will automatically detach themselves after exactly 24 hours. Number 4. Performance. NGT is the magic that allows for application-consistent VSS snapshots without causing any VM stuns. And finally, lifecycle management. Anytime you clone a VM or do an in-place revert, you need to expect to manually re-enable NGT and likely restart that guest service. I want to leave you with a provocative thought to really test your understanding today. Let's say you schedule an application-consistent snapshot, and it actually causes a VM stun in your cluster. Which NGT prerequisite did you likely miss? Think back on everything we've covered today, whether it's that IDE slot, the specific port number, or maybe a recent clone operation. You now have the exact knowledge required to troubleshoot it. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep reviewing these concepts, trust in your preparation, and best of luck on your NCP-MCI 7.5 certification journey.